Another anti-vaxxer wishes to spout his pseudo-scientific beliefs to the world, and I'm here to disprove some more claims. But first, let me tell you why I'm taking this so personally. I'm autistic, and I have been since I was born many decades ago. I'm tired of autism being portrayed as some horrible disease. It is not. It is also not something that can be acquired or cured. It is a neurodevelopmental condition that begins in utero. It is pervasive, meaning it does not go away at adolescence. Much like the left-handed were once foolishly considered inherently evil, autistics are not inherently retarded burdens who would be much better off if we could be eliminated, or at the very least, reduced in number. There is no epidemic because there is no contagious agent. Anti-vaxxers, I know you think you are helping, but really you are just whining over your perceived misfortunes. And with help like yours, I, for one, would rather have no help at all. Now, on with the show.
Do vaccines cause autism?
No. And science supports that statement 100%.
In the last 30 years, the childhood vaccine schedule has tripled.
Yes. From polio, MMR, and DTP, to polio, MMR, DTP, Hep B, retrovirus, Hib, pneumococcal, flu, varicella, and Hep A. What is your point? Medical science is finding new ways to prevent disease regularly.
While the U.S. autism rate has skyrocketed from 1 in 10,000 to 1 in 50.
You are saying nothing here, given that in 1980, the prevalence number is based on cases diagnosed, just as the current 1 in 68 number is. You are only pointing out the number of people known to have autism with the number of people known to have autism, while ignoring the increase in awareness and diagnosis. Neither is the actual number of people with autism.
Dozens of published research papers show that yes, vaccines and autism are linked.
Now, since neither your video description nor this video actually names the dozens of cases, I will have to ask you to provide the names of those studies. Until then, this is another non-point.
Yet the debate rages on, in part because of the 1986 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act, passed by Congress as a result of pharmaceutical lobbying.
I think that given the case that this act provides a legal remedy for children who are actually injured by vaccination, without the chance component of a jury trial, you should be all for it. But where would your conspiracy theory be if you actually applied logic to your claims?
It shields drug companies from liability for injuries and deaths caused by the vaccines they manufacture. Vaccines that the federal government admits are unavoidably unsafe.
Unavoidably unsafe for a small percentage of the population, just as aspirin, penicillin, and cough medicine is unavoidably unsafe for a portion of the population.
To see how this tilted the law in Big Pharma's favor, let's look at Eric, a child suffering from vaccine-induced autism.
There is no such condition as vaccine-induced autism. Autism is a neurodevelopmental condition known to exist in utero, with strong indications of a genetic component. Autism cannot be induced.
Had Eric been harmed by a pharmaceutical product other than vaccines, his parents could sue the manufacturer in civil court, entitling them to the standard legal process with a judge, jury, private attorneys, legal precedent, and discovery.
with the same risks of mistrial, lawyer incompetence, jury prejudice, etc., instead of a specialized court set up to hear cases of a specific nature. Also, your intimation that the vaccine court does not adhere to the legal procedures of any other court, precedents, legal representation, and discovery is an absolute falsehood.
All within public view.
All records of the vaccine court are accessible to the public. In fact, I have had more than one occasion to peruse their online database, which is free and easy to access.
But for kids like Eric, the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act says no.
The National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act says, prove it. In the case of autism and vaccines, every scientific study says no. Studies that take into account more than 12 misused children.
Instead of suing the pharmaceutical company directly, parents of children like Eric are forced to petition the Department of Health and Human Services, and if federal health officials oppose compensation, the case is argued before a special master in the U.S. Claims Court. Many refer to this as vaccine court, though it isn't a court at all, but rather an administrative procedure.
The vaccine court operates in every way as a court. It hears testimony, reviews evidence, and makes judgments on a case-by-case basis,
in which the family asks the government to admit the vaccine caused their child harm and requests compensation for the child's care.
After which the family must prove on an evidentiary basis that, in fact, a vaccine did cause the injury. If proven, they are given automatic award without the possibility of an appeal.
Here are some shocking facts about the so-called vaccine court. Pharmaceutical companies do not have to participate in the proceedings at all,
because the court operates on a no-fault system, meaning that if an injury is vaccine-induced, the reward is given automatically without condition, no bargaining, no appeal.
Taxpayers pay for all damages.
The Vaccine Injury Compensation Trust Fund is paid for by an excise tax on each dose of a vaccine. Under 26 U.S. Code 4131A, there is hereby imposed a tax on any taxable vaccine sold by the manufacturer, producer, or importer thereof. What that means is that the manufacturer or importer is taxed. Certainly that tax does trickle down to the purchaser and consumer, but that is hardly the same as the general taxpayer. You use it, you pay for it.
The U.S. Department of Justice acts as the government's lawyer, with taxpayers footing the bill for their defense.
An officer of the Department of Justice acts as a lawyer for the Department of Health and Human Services. And yes, we pay that bill. What do you want? Even a confessed criminal is entitled to a lawyer.
The family's attorney is paid out of the trust fund, administered by the Department of Health and Human Services, which has a history of punishing plaintiffs' lawyers by slashing their fees and waiting a decade or more to pay them.
The trust fund is managed by the Department of the Treasury, not the Department of Health and Human Services. You should sit back and try to imagine the class action suit that would erupt if the lawyers did not get paid,
leaving some families without any legal representation.
Pure appeal to emotion. Not only will the court pay for the lawyer if you meet a few minimum requirements, they will waive the filing fee.
There's no required discovery process, so potentially incriminating documents stay hidden in the hands of the vaccine manufacturers.
This statement presumes that the special masters pronounce judgment without evidence. Nothing could be further from the truth. There are court officers whose job it is to make judgments based on the preponderance of the evidence.
Most hearings are off limits. No public, no reporters.
Which is not unusual given that any judge can and has, on their own will, required the same.
There's no judge or jury. A special master appointed by the U.S. Court of Federal Claims both presides over the hearings and issues the rulings, which can limit the chance of an objective verdict.
Special masters are court-appointed officers empowered to enforce the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. These are not laymen who came in off the street, however.
Legal precedent is limited.
Legal precedent is no more limited in vaccine court than any other court in the United States.
So the program issues contradictory rulings. In the case of Bailey Banks, a special master ruled the boy's autism was caused in fact by the MMR vaccine.
In the case of Bailey Banks, his pediatrician misdiagnosed Bailey with autism. He was later correctly diagnosed with ADEM, which caused PDD, not autism, which was what the court awarded on.
Yet in later cases, special masters ruled that vaccines do not cause autism.
By other cases, you mean the omnibus autism proceeding, of course. Since every legitimate scientific study shows no connection between vaccines and autism, how else would you expect them to rule?
Even though federal compensation has been awarded in at least 83 cases with autism.
I have already debunked this claim, but for your edification, I will be happy to do it again, and I suggest pausing. To start off with, this study was released by SafeMinds.org, an internet organization campaigning against vaccines. It is an unscientific study with clear conflicts of interest. The federal government does not make claims about science. The fact is that science has never found any link between vaccines and autism, and they have been trying. The vaccine court has never awarded a case on the basis of autism. Autism is a spectrum disorder, and its generalized symptoms can be found in other more specific disorders, but having autism-like symptoms are not the same as having autism. What we will see in this study is not causes of autism induced by vaccination, but I will mention here this. If a child has autism and they are injured by a vaccine, this is in no way proof that the vaccine caused the autism. This entire paragraph is nothing but Lynn Redwood's personal opinion, full of confirmation bias and unwarranted conclusions. It would have no place in a scientific study, as this paper does not represent such a study. Neither the federal government nor Congress does research. Science does research. All legitimate research has come to the same conclusion. Vaccines do not cause autism. Peer review in the legal sense is not peer review in the scientific sense. Legal peer review does not have to meet the requirements of scientific rigor required for scientific peer review. We will now switch to the paper itself. So a professor of law, an investigator, and two lawyers with a clear conflict of interest. No scientists, no practicing medical doctors, and no practicing psychiatrists or psychologists. I won't pretend to nitpick every detail of logical fallacy with this study in this video, or we would be here for hours. There will be a link in the description. I will, however, deal with the conclusion and how they arrived at it. Autism is a pervasive neurodevelopmental disorder, not simply a psychiatric diagnosis. Much like there is no meaningful distinction between flu and flu-like symptoms, autism is a spectrum, but that spectrum does not extend so far as to include all conditions which may share even the most minimal commonalities. Because doing so could hurt the efforts of your declared conflicts of interest. To be clear, that is prevalence of diagnosis, not prevalence of existence. The distinction is not so subtle. It has been, in fact, disproven in every legitimate scientific study ever conducted. In other words, broadening the definition of autism to any case that deals with brain injury, also not a cause of autism, from vaccines that produces autism-like symptoms. In fact, the legal definition of causation is reliant on the scientific definition of causation. Encephalopathy is a condition which is known to not be autism. It may have symptoms that appear to the layman similar to autism. Autism is also not a seizure disorder in any sense. Used relevant terms related to autism. In other words, a database designed to search for terms such as autism, autism-like, nonverbal, regressive, etc. So with this search function, you discover cases that these terms were referenced in, not cases where the decision was based on autism. I take it this is what you earlier meant by the difference in scientific and legal causation. So we have 21 cases where two conditions, neither of which is autism, were awarded, and there was a mention of autism or autism-like. Looking through these findings, I see that we are citing arguments brought during hearings, not legal rulings or scientific evidence. I understand that in proceedings, the use of rhetorical fallacies is commonplace, but fallacy is all it is. This proves nothing. The mere mention of an item in a hearing is never considered proof of the item. Evidence is required. Regression is not a typical feature of autism. Self-injurious meltdowns are not limited to severe autism. Autistic self-injury is unique from non-autistic self-injury, being that such is limited in scope to the meltdown mechanism. Autism is not a form of brain injury. It is a pervasive neurodevelopmental condition. Autism cannot be caused by injury to a non-autistic brain, though trauma can cause autism-like symptoms. In the Banks case, the diagnosis was ADEM with PDD. This is PDD otherwise specified. Also, during the case, it was specifically noted that PDD can and does exist as a non-autistic diagnosis. A pre-existing mitochondrial disorder is not autism, since autism is not a mitochondrial disorder. Encephalopathy may have autism-like symptoms, but autism-like symptoms are not autism. Autism has never been associated with vaccine injury, although the petitioner's lawyer or witnesses may attempt to make the claim. Science clearly demonstrates that no such association exists. Injury to a neurotypical brain never results in autism. Autism-like symptoms may result, but the brain itself, sans injury, is typical in all regards. And so, not finding enough cases that merely mention the possibility of autism, or at least hinted at it, a lawyer with an established conflict of interest contacted parents to find parent-identified autistic children. Not only would any scientist laugh you out of the door for using such tactics, there is no indication here of whether these parent-identified children were autistic prior to vaccination or not. Perhaps because the government does not accept diagnoses made by laymen under any other circumstances, such as Social Security claims, Veterans Affairs medical claims, etc. No, actually, they do not lend credence. You are asking non-medically, psychologically trained laymen to fill out a questionnaire on behalf of the activity they observe in other persons. Not only is it not credible, but the results are subject to bias. A step that would have actually lent credence to the parental diagnosis, but that you did not see fit to take. The only step that would have lent worth to your claim as well, but not in keeping with the narrative you are trying to build. Regardless of the qualifications of the trained professional psychologist who designed the questionnaire for use by other professional psychologists, the parents or legal professionals are not qualified to make the diagnosis from them. Clearly, the trained psychological professionals who put together the questionnaire are communicating to the trained legal professionals and the unwitting layman parents that the questionnaire is not for use by laymen to diagnose autism. Actually, you have only shown that you know how to do keyword searches and practice psychology without a license, something which I believe is illegal in most states. Science has clearly demonstrated that your conclusion is false. Except in the important facts of autism not being a seizure disorder of any kind, and the fact that encephalopathy and autism are exclusionary in definition and diagnosis. That was fun. Now back to the video reply.
Almost unbelievably, the Department of Health and Human Services actually owns vaccine patents. When these vaccines are purchased, HHS profits.
This is a straw man. HHS does not lose anything if a family wins a case in the vaccine court. As previously noted, a trust fund has been set aside to compensate those families, and it is maintained by an excise tax.
In the words of Eric's mom, government attorneys defend a government program using government-funded science decided by federal bureaucrats trying to keep their government jobs. Kids like Eric never had a chance.
A flagrant appeal to emotion. Eric's mom's opinion is valueless in determining whether vaccines cause autism. At this point, however, I'm not surprised that you would make this attempt.
The passing of the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act prompted manufacturers to ramp up development of new vaccines, furiously lobbying the CDC to add their new shots to the recommended schedule. As a result, a baby today receives more vaccinations by 6 months than her mother did by the time she graduated high school.
The alternative to believing this claim is to understand that medical science has not stopped advancing humanity's knowledge when it comes to preventing disease.
Amazingly, neither HHS nor Congress has ever reviewed the potentially devastating health effects this vaccination surge has had on our children.
Another outright lie. Multiple studies have been done every year on this very topic. These are the studies that have proven beyond a doubt that autism is not caused by vaccination.
Today, over half of all U.S. kids suffer from chronic disease and disability.
That is quite an impressive claim. Care to cite any sources to back it up?
At a November 2012 congressional autism hearing, CDC officials failed to cite even one study backing up vaccine safety claims.
At this particular hearing, were they actually asked to do so? Because a number of such scientific studies had come out prior to this.
Congress is now planning federal hearings to further investigate the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program.
Now today, there's information that's on the internet, which is where we were told the president had found his information some years ago, that says that there was a study published in Lancet in 1998 by Andrew Wakefield alleging a connection between measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine, MMR, and autism. Let's say you're a physician or pediatrician and a parent comes in and says, I've been on the internet and I'm concerned because I found that according to this medical journal, there is a relationship between this measles and mumps vaccine and the possibility of my child being autistic. What would you say to that parent?
Autism is a terrible condition. That paper that you're mentioning has been totally discredited. It was found to be fraudulent and is not the case. There have been dozens of studies of vaccines and the question of autism. Vaccines don't cause autism. They are highly effective and safe and are a good way to protect your children from vaccine-preventable diseases.
When you say totally discredited, what do you mean by that?
The information in that particular report was found to be fraudulent by a British investigator. Some of the information wasn't correct in terms of the notes that were submitted. But there have been dozens of studies that were better to try to understand whether there is a link between vaccines and autism. It was sort of a natural question some parents had because of the onset age for autism. But those studies have been incredibly reassuring. So when I talk to the public or I talk to parents, I like to explain that as a physician and as a public health expert, I can tell you that vaccines are very safe and effective, and while autism is a terrible condition, one thing we know is that vaccines don't cause autism.
So you would say to the parent that that article was just flat wrong?
That's right.
And that numerous studies have showed that it was wrong?
That's right.
And what happened to the author of the article?
He lost his medical license.
Because why?
Because of the fraudulent behavior.